He hadn't called in nearly a year. And maybe that alone should have told me everything I needed to know. But when the phone rang that Thursday afternoon and Darren's name appeared on the screen, my heart, it did that old lift. That split-second flutter before your brain catches up with your chest. Hope. Even after all this time. He said they were having a little birthday party for Emily, my granddaughter. Said it like it was normal. As if we hadn't spent years talking in silence and answering each other with absence. He even joked about the sugar cookies I used to bake, the ones with cracked edges and the cinnamon glaze. Like sweetness could patch everything he left unsaid. Outside, it was drizzling. A soft kind of rain, the kind that makes the world quieter. Like it's listening in. I remember standing by the window, still holding the phone. Long after the call had ended, I told myself, maybe this is it. Maybe this is where things begin again. Maybe time really does soften sharp things. Maybe being a mother isn't always a losing game. That night, I packed slowly, took out the navy dress I saved for nice occasions, pressed it myself, folded it neatly, tucked in a hand-knit scarf for Emily, and slipped a photo into the lining of my purse. Me and Darren, he still had braces then. Still held my hand, like he meant it. I wasn't going to give it to him. Just needed to remember. When you get older, packing for a trip is different. You don't rush. You touch everything. You close the fridge a little softer. Water the plants a little slower. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was worried, but because I had hope. Hope. After a long time of not having anything to wait for, except pharmacy discounts or new soup recipes. If you're listening to this from a quiet kitchen, an old couch, or through headphones on a long ride, thank you for making space in your day for this. At Tenacity Tales, we hold on to the quiet things that stay long after the noise fades. Where are you listening from, and what part of this story is sitting with you, if you feel like it? Leave a few words below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, a soft subscribe is all it takes to stay close. Friday morning came like any other, except I was standing by the door. Coat on. Suitcase upright. Checking the time. For the 5th time in 10 minutes, Darren said he'd be here around 8. At 8:13, I was still waiting. It's funny how, when you're waiting on someone you love, 5 minutes feels like a whole lifetime wrapped in silence. He pulled up just before 8:30. Windows down. Music too loud for a quiet morning. He smiled like everything was fine. Like this was how things had always been. And I smiled back. Because that's what mothers do. Even when we don't know what's coming. We smile anyway. He didn't talk much on the drive. Just tapped the steering wheel. Eyes ahead. Mind already elsewhere. We pulled up near the side entrance of the train station. The sky was bright, but the air still carried that soft hush of early morning. He leaned over and popped the trunk. Didn't get out of the car. Just stayed there, engine running. Fingers drumming. Like he was dropping off dry cleaning. Not his mother. I stepped out. The sudden shift made my knees ache. He didn't notice. Or didn't care. I lifted the suitcase up to the curb. Waited a moment, just in case he'd change his mind. Get out. Say something real. He didn't. He rolled the window down. Said he'd already bought the ticket. Told me to head inside. The train would be arriving soon. Said he had to run a quick errand, grab coffee, check on the caterer. Nothing that couldn't have waited. But still, he left. He smiled, half-hearted and brief, the kind of smile that flickers and dies before it fully forms. Then shifted the car into gear and drove off without a backward glance. No hug. No goodbye. Just taillights fading down the street. I stood there for a moment. Just me and the humming quiet of a nearly empty morning. Then I pulled my suitcase closer and walked inside. The station was quiet old in the way places get when no one updates them for decades. Vinyl seats bolted to the floor, a clock on the wall ticking louder than the space around it, 2 vending machines humming in the corner like background thoughts. I walked to the ticket window, gave my name. The woman behind the glass typed something, then paused, frowned, asked if I was sure the ticket had been purchased today. I nodded. She searched again, slower this time, then looked up and said nothing under that name. No reservation. No seat. I checked my purse. No paper ticket. No email confirmation. Phone at 3%. No charger. No backup. So I sat, near the window, suitcase beside me, coat still on, and waited. 5 minutes. Then 10. Then 30. No call. No message. No Darren. I told myself he was probably delayed. Maybe traffic. Maybe a mix-up. Maybe the clerk made a mistake. I told myself a lot of things. Because the truth, when it arrives, doesn't always knock. An hour passed. I stood up, walked outside, looked up and down the street. No silver SUV. Just a stray dog weaving through the lot, and a man buying a newspaper. I waited anyway, then went back inside. This time, the bench felt harder, the silence louder. I wrapped my coat tighter around my chest, folded my hands, watched the same second-hand tick past the same numbers. And somewhere between then and the next 10 minutes, I stopped being a traveler and became the one left behind. The clerk glanced at me curious. Maybe. Or just tired of seeing me still there. I stood up, tried Darren's number again. It rang once, then straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't trust my voice to sound steady. My phone died soon after. The screen went black, like it had decided it didn't want to witness this either. I walked outside again, looking for a cab, a rideshare, anything, but all I found was wind, and the ache of being somewhere no one expects you to be. I stopped a woman nearby, kind eyes, soft voice, asked if I could borrow her phone for a quick call. She hesitated, but handed it over. I dialed Darren. 1 ring, then a click. He declined the call. I gave the phone back, said thank you. She didn't ask anything, just nodded, then walked away. I went back into the station. The bench felt colder now, harder. 2. I searched my purse again. All I found was a crumpled $10 bill and a few tissues. I hadn't brought money. I hadn't planned to be alone. I looked around. A boy with headphones. A woman with 2 sleeping children. No one looked at me. That might have hurt more than if they had. Because at least then, I would have existed in someone's eyes. I was just starting to fold in on myself when a voice broke the silence. You look like you could use something warm. I looked up. She stood there, about my age. Denim jacket worn at the sleeves, holding a cup of something steaming. Her name was Ruthie. She said her bookshop was just across the street. Nothing fancy, just paperbacks and bad coffee, but it was warm, and I could sit if I wanted. No pressure. I nodded. I didn't have the strength to refuse kindness. We crossed the street slowly. The wheels of my suitcase kept catching on cracks in the sidewalk. She noticed and slowed her pace to match mine. She didn't say much, and I appreciated that. Sometimes, what you need isn't answers, just space to stop pretending you're okay. The bookshop was small walls lined with paperbacks. The air filled with something like old pages and overbrewed tea. Not sweet, not sharp, just quiet, like a place that had forgotten how to demand anything from anyone. Ruthie pointed to a faded armchair near the window. I sat down slowly, my coat still on, purse in my lap. I didn't take anything off, I wasn't ready to. She didn't ask what happened. Didn't ask my name. She just moved behind the counter, turned on a small electric kettle, and took down 2 chipped mugs from the shelf. Her hands moved with age, but not with weakness. They were steady like someone who had poured tea through storms before. We didn't speak much. She poured, handed me a cup. It was bitter, but warm. I held it with both hands like it might stop me from disappearing. Outside, a group of teenagers passed by, laughing, the kind of laughter that belongs to people who haven't been left yet. I sipped slowly, let the silence stay, and for the first time that day, I wasn't trying to hold anything together. I just sat. Eventually, Ruthie spoke. She said she'd been running the shop nearly 30 years. Said people didn't read like they used to, but that the weight of books anchored her in a way nothing else could. I nodded, because I understood. She didn't ask why I was there. She just talked around the quiet, like it was an old friend that visited often. At one point, she told me she'd once been left at a bus station in Tulsa. Said it wasn't the same as being forgotten, it was worse. It was being made invisible. That word, it stayed with me. Invisible. I hadn't cried at the station, not even when my phone died. But in that chair, with that cup in my hand and Ruthie's soft voice in the air, something in me folded. Not broke, just gave in. A little. She didn't try to fix it. Just brought over a worn paperback from a shelf, placed it beside me. Read it or don't. She said, sometimes, the weight of a story is enough. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Just having it there, solid and quiet, was more comfort than I'd had in a long time. When night came, she brought me a blanket, told me I could stay. No rush, no rules. And so, that night, I slept in a bookshop, in my coat, with a half-finished cup of tea beside me and a book I didn't open, but still held on to like it might keep me from unraveling. Sometimes, you don't need advice, just a quiet chair and someone who doesn't ask questions. Have you ever had a space like that if you're listening from a corner of stillness today? Tenacity Tales is glad you're here. Feel free to leave a little note. A whisper of what you're feeling. What part of this story is resting in your chest? And if you found yourself in these soft pages, a gentle subscribe is more than enough, just a way to say, I'm still listening. We'll continue soon, same story. But next, there's a morning in the bookshop, and something in her heart shifts quietly. And now, let's get back to this emotional story. I left the bookshop the next morning. The rain had stopped, but the sky still looked unsure, like it hadn't made up its mind between holding on and letting go. I took the bus home, Saturday near the back, my suitcase between my feet, its wheels wet from the sidewalk. When I stepped into the apartment, everything felt heavier, not in a dramatic way, just a quiet kind of weight, like the air had been holding its breath while I was gone. I set the suitcase by the door, peeled off my damp coat, and walked straight to the hallway closet. There was a filing cabinet in there, old, metal, a bit rusted at the edges, the kind of thing people forget to throw out, but never really forget. The drawer stuck a little. It always did when the air got thick. I pulled harder. It gave way. Inside folders, letters, history. In the middle, exactly where I'd left, it was the one marked with Darren's name. It held the trust documents, the ones my husband set up before his first surgery, the ones meant to protect Darren and Emily one day. But I was still the trustee. I had never let that go. I flipped through the pages slowly. The language was formal, but the meaning was clear. No funds could be released without my written approval. There was even a clause, one my husband insisted on, that required independent verification for any claim of diminished capacity. He'd watched his own mother get tricked once. He swore he wouldn't let it happen again. Not to me. I reached the back of the folder, a flap I rarely touched. Inside was a letter from the bank, dated just a few weeks ago. It confirmed Darren had submitted a request to begin partial withdrawal from the trust. Attached was a letter signed in my name. But the signature wasn't mine. The loops were wrong. The tilt was off. It looked like something traced, not written. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. He must have copied it from old birthday cards. Ones I used to send to Emily. He must have thought I wouldn't notice. That I'd never check. But I had. And I did. And I remembered everything. The next morning, I picked up the landline in my kitchen, the old one with the long, tangled cord, and dialed Kendrick. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was still the same. Steady. Like someone who'd spent a lifetime reading between lines and catching lies before they landed. I told him I needed to come in. He didn't ask why. Just gave me a time. The bus ride into the city was quiet. The streets were still slick from rain. Sidewalks shining like varnish. Kendrick's office was tucked between a post office and a law library, same as always. He opened the door before I knocked. Just like he used to. Just like when my husband was still here. He didn't waste time. Just motioned to the brown leather chair I used to sit in, the one that always squeaked when I leaned back. It still did. I reached into my bag. Slid the forged letter across the desk. He didn't touch it. Just looked at it. Then looked at me. "You remember the clause we added?" he asked. I nodded. Every word. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, pulled out a red folder. It was marked with my husband's initials. Inside was something I hadn't seen before, a sealed envelope. He broke the seal carefully. Then unfolded the contents. It was an addendum, signed 6 months before my husband passed. A clause that had never been triggered until now. It stated that if any beneficiary attempted to manipulate, falsify, or coerce the trustee, the trust would be frozen immediately. No second chances. No appeals. Permanent disqualification, unless reversed by 2 named legal advisors, both of whom were no longer living. Kendrick placed the page in front of me, tapped the paragraph with his finger. "This gives us authority to act," he said. "All we need is written notice and proof." I had the proof. I gave him the letter. He handed me a pen. I signed. He made the call. Calm. Precise. Named the clause. Cited the section. Confirmed me as active trustee with full control. By the time he hung up, the account was frozen. No access. No notification. Just silence, and something in me settling for the first time in months. I leaned back in the chair, looked up at the painting on his wall, a forest scene my husband once said reminded him of home. I used to find it too quiet. Trop incertain. But now, I understood it. Kendrick locked the file drawer, walked me to the door, placed a hand on my shoulder. Didn't say anything. He didn't have to. For the first time in weeks, my steps felt like mine again. The envelope came 2 days later. Courrier delivery. No return address, just my name typed neatly on the front. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. But I did. Slowly. Inside a printed letter from Darren. 4 pages. Single-spaced. Defensive from the very first line. He never used the word forgery. Never admitted to what he did. Just offered a series of justifications. Each paragraph shaped to protect himself. Not to reach me. He wrote about misunderstandings. Timeline confusion. And unfortunate oversight. He spoke of my memory as if it were a hallway with too many locked doors. Suggested, gently of course, that perhaps I had forgotten more than I realized. He said he was trying to protect me from stress, from confusion, from the weight of responsibility. He said it like a gift, like betrayal could be rewrapped in concern. There was also a second document, An affidavit. Signed by a doctor I hadn't seen in over 3 years. The date had been altered. The language vague. Signs of fatigue. It said, age-related forgetfulness. Convenient words. Words that can bend in any direction you need them to. I set the pages aside. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. Not for this. I went to the store for groceries, milk, apples, bread. When I returned, the voicemail light was blinking. 2 messages. The first routine, clinic confirming my upcoming physical. The second, Emily. Her voice was cautious, like someone speaking in a room where they weren't alone. She didn't ask questions. Didn't say much. Just said hi. Said she missed the cookies I used to make. Then hung up. That was it. Just a thread of a voice. Barely enough to hold on to, but I did. Not because she knew the full story, but because something in her voice said she was starting to wonder. I listened to Emily's message twice. Not because it was long, it wasn't. Just a soft hi. A mention of cookies. And silence. But it was her silence that said more than the words did. She didn't say where she was. Didn't ask how I was. Didn't say she missed me, only the cookies. But there was something in her voice. Like a breath held too long. Like maybe she was whispering from a place she wasn't allowed to speak freely. I didn't call back. I couldn't. She hadn't left a number. But I sat there, holding a grocery bag still half full. And I felt something I hadn't, in a long time, not hope exactly. But recognition. Not from her. Not fully. But maybe. The beginning of it. Maybe she was starting to notice the cracks. The kind of cracks you don't see when you're told a story often enough. The kind that only become visible when the silence stretches just a little too far, or when the people you trust speak too perfectly. Too rehearsed. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to write anything down. I just stood up. Put the apples in the bowl. The bread in the drawer. The milk in the fridge. Simple things. Things that keep the world turning. But in the space between the shelf and the counter, something inside me settled a little. Because now, I wasn't the only one carrying the weight of doubt. It was Kendrick who asked to meet again. Said there was something I needed to see, something he didn't want to say over the phone. We met at a diner off Union Street. One of those places where the booths were cracked and the waitresses never wrote anything down. I got there early. Chose a booth that faced the door. He arrived 10 minutes later, carrying a manila folder and looking more tired than usual. No greetings. No small talk. Just coffee. Black. And the folder, he slid it across the table. Opened it. Inside emails. Dozens of them. Most were from Darren. A few from someone at the bank. One from a lawyer I didn't recognize. All of them circled the same thing: access. Control. Positioning. Kendrick didn't explain. He just tapped one particular email. Dated 2 weeks before Darren called about Emily's birthday. In it, Darren outlined a plan. Not a hope. Not a guess. A plan. Temporary isolation. Compliance strategy. Transitioning financial oversight. Words dressed up in professionalism, but I knew what they meant. He had staged it. The invitation. The station. The wait. None of it was accidental. Kendrick leaned back. Let me read in silence. The coffee cooled. Neither of us touched it. The truth didn't hit like betrayal. It landed with the soft thud of confirmation. I closed the folder. Placed my hands on it. Not shaking. Just steady. He had planned it. All of it. I looked up. Asked Kendrick. What happens next? He told me the bank's review was complete. The signatures didn't match. The withdrawal attempt was logged. No further access allowed unless I filed a formal complaint. I didn't answer. Just nodded. Then he added something else. A second bank one Darren was tied to through his own firm had flagged a similar attempt. Another transfer. Another manipulation. I didn't feel anger. What I felt was this: I had seen the edges now. The full blueprint. And it was as cold and exact as I'd suspected. The knock came just after 6. Not loud. Just 3 soft taps, like someone testing the weight of their own presence. I didn't get up. Didn't rush to the door. Just sat on the couch. The only light in the room coming from over the sink. I already knew it was him. Through the peephole, Darren. Suit jacket, slightly wrinkled. Phone in one hand. A familiar stiffness in his shoulders, like he was bracing for something, but still thought he could control the shape of it. He knocked again. Softer this time. Then waited. I watched him shift his weight. Look down the hall. Check his phone. Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an envelope, and slid it under the door. No words. No mom. Just paper and silence. He didn't walk away right away. Stood there a moment longer, maybe expecting the door to open. But I didn't move. Eventually, I heard him sigh. Then footsteps. Then nothing. I waited 10 full minutes. Not out of drama. Out of choice. Then I got up. Picked up the envelope. His handwriting. Neat. Deliberate. The kind people use when they think it might be their last chance to explain something. I didn't read it right away. Didn't even open it. Just held it in my hand for a moment. Then placed it in the drawer by the keys. Not for keeping. Not for burning. Just for setting aside. Because some things don't deserve an answer. Just a place to rest. The next morning, I walked to the notary's office. Kendrick had already prepared the documents. The air was cold, but it didn't feel sharp, just clean. Like something had been cleared out. And all that was left was the sound of my own steps on the pavement. The notary was a quiet woman with careful hands and kind eyes that didn't ask questions. She slid the forms toward me, page by page, each line already typed, each box waiting for my initials. Full revocation of Darren's access, transfer of secondary rights. Emily's name removed for now. Kendrick had said it could be reversed later if I ever felt ready. But today, I wasn't. I signed each page slowly, my pen steady in the margin. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. By the final signature, I didn't feel triumphant. Just right. The notary stamped everything. Handed me the sealed copy. Wished me a good rest of the day. I left with the envelope tucked under my coat like a quiet declaration. On the way home, I passed the park. There was a bench, the one I used to sit on with Emily. We'd count yellow leaves. Feed the ducks. Make up stories about strangers walking by. I didn't stop. Didn't look long. I just walked past it. Eyes forward. Some places you don't need to visit again. You just need to know you once belonged there. Later that week, I went to the bank. Not because I needed to. Because I wanted to. I wanted to look someone in the eye and ask. I gave my name at the front desk. Waited as they checked the system. The associate, a young woman, hair tied back. Voice soft, looked at her screen. Then at me. She smiled, nodded, said, "You're still the sole authorized party." Those words simple. Procedural landed deeper than I expected. Still. Sole. Mine. She handed me a printed confirmation slip. I folded it carefully. Tucked it inside my coat pocket, like something sacred. As I walked out, I passed the teller counter. A young man stood behind the glass. He looked up. Smiled politely. He looked like someone Darren used to coach in Little League. Same posture. Same hopeful eyes. But this one hadn't learned to pretend yet. Hadn't learned how to talk sweet while taking. I smiled back. Then kept walking. Outside. The wind had picked up. I pulled my coat tighter, hand still on the folded paper in my pocket, like if I let go of it too soon, it might disappear. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights low and the house quiet. I didn't make tea, didn't play music, just opened the drawer beside the fridge and pulled out my old checkbook. I hadn't used it in months. The corners were curled, the pages stiff from disuse. But it still opened, still waited for my hand. I started with the retirement fund. Just a small check to restart what I had once let lapse. Then the heating company, a prepayment for winter service. Not because I was worried, but because I liked the idea of being prepared. Then a third, a donation to the local literacy group I used to volunteer with, back when Darren told me I was too tired to keep showing up for things. Each check, each signature, felt like a quiet act of return. Not revenge, not punishment, just restoration. A small, steady reminder that the parts of me he tried to make smaller were never his to shrink. When I finished, I stacked the envelopes, sealed them with care, and set them beside the door to be mailed in the morning. Then I turned off the lamp, pushed the chair in, and stood for a long while in the silence I had chosen for myself. That evening, I made soup, just lentils, carrots, rosemary from the windowsill, nothing special, but warm and mine. I didn't check the phone, didn't expect mail, didn't wonder if someone might knock. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache, just rests. I moved slowly, measured each spoonful, washed each dish with both hands in the water, not to pass time but to feel it. In that silence, I felt something settle in me. I didn't need to be right. I didn't need to be heard. I didn't even need him to understand what he'd done. I was breathing on my own again. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't proving anything to anyone. This space, this small, lived-in place finally felt like mine again. Then came the knock. Not urgent, not repeated, just present. I walked to the door slowly, heart still calm. It wasn't Darren, just the neighbor's son, and bringing back a casserole dish I had loaned them months ago. He smiled shyly, said thank you, and left. Nothing heavy, no message tucked inside, no weight carried in. When I closed the door, the air stayed still, and for once, I didn't feel like someone had entered or left, just that I had stayed, and that was enough. The next morning, I opened the drawer by the door. The letter Darren had slid underneath, still there, still sealed. I unfolded it carefully, like holding something fragile, but no longer sharp. His handwriting was neat, tuneat, like he had rehearsed it, or like someone else had coached the tone. He wrote about stress, about concern, about misunderstandings that, somehow, all came from me. He didn't name what he did, didn't apologize, just danced around the truth like it was an open flame he refused to look directly at. I read it twice, not because I hoped for anything new, but because I needed to know I could face it without flinching, and I did. Then I folded the paper back up, placed it into a small envelope, wrote the date on the corner, and slid it into the lowest drawer of my cabinet. Not to keep it close, not to forgive, but to remind myself that I remember. You don't have to burn things to let them go. Sometimes, you just store them in a place that no longer hurts. That afternoon, I dressed in a blouse I hadn't worn in years, pressed the collar, clipped on a small pearl pin. I wasn't going anywhere in particular, but I was choosing to show up in my own skin clean, a whole, and unashamed. I returned to the bank that Thursday morning. Same branch, samme tiled floors, same smell of overfiltered air. But this time, my steps were mine. I asked to see the senior associate again. The same woman. She remembered me. Led me into the same glass-paneled room. We reviewed the documents Kendrick had finalized. Full revocation of Darren's joint access. Closure of linked accounts. Transfer of all oversight solely to me. No alert. No warning sent to him. Just Kiat removal. She asked if I'd like to leave a statement for him. Or request notification. I shook my head. There was nothing else he needed to know. And nothing I needed to explain. She handed me the final confirmation to sign. I paused only once, not out of hesitation, but to let myself feel how solid that pen was in my hand. I signed. She stamped. It was done. On the way out, I passed a bakery. Something warm caught my eye in the window. I stepped in. Bought a small apple tart. For the first time in years. I wasn't buying it for someone else. Not for a visit. Not for a party. Not as an apology. Just for me. I carried it home in both hands like it might crumble if I let the moment pass too quickly. Have you ever done something so small, and yet felt your entire self return? Slowly. Like a breath you didn't know you were holding. Here at Tenacity Tales, we don't tell stories to teach. We tell them to sit with you quietly like someone who's been there too. If something in this chapter touched you, feel free to leave a thought below, or just a small heart. And if you'd like to keep walking through this journey, the next parts are waiting. Sometimes, all it takes is one small tap to subscribe, so these stories can find you right when you need them most. That weekend, I walked 3 blocks past the post office. I turned left at the flower shop and stepped into a small, quiet branch of a different bank. No one there knew my name, and that was the point. I sat with a young associate who smiled with the kind of politeness that hadn't yet been worn down by routine. He asked what I needed. I said, a new account. Just me. No joint access. No secondary names. He nodded. He didn't ask why. Typed steadily. Hands moving fast over the keyboard, as if he understood urgency without explanation. I signed the forms. Initialed the boxes. Chose a card design I didn't care about. When he handed me the paperwork, I read every word. Slowly. Out loud in my head. This account didn't carry memory. Didn't hold shadows. It was clean. Mine. He asked if I wanted to set up online access. I said not yet. There was something comforting about knowing this account existed quietly off the map of anyone else's knowledge. That night, I didn't make tea. Didn't turn on the television. Just poured a glass of cold water. Stood at the window. And watched cars drift past in the street below. No calls came. No questions followed. And for once, that silence didn't feel like an absence. It felt like space. A few days later, I returned to the bookshop. No suitcase. No trembling voice. Just me with a book in my bag. And steadier steps. Ruthie looked up as I entered. Zama denim jacket. Same Kiat eyes. She didn't say welcome back. Just nodded. Like she'd known I would return when I was ready. The armchair by the window was still there. So was the dust. The soft creak of the floorboards. And the hum of the old kettle. This time, I didn't sit empty-handed. I reached into my bag. Pulled out a book, one I'd once loved. Then, forgotten. It wasn't a grand story. Just Kiat. Like me. I read slowly. Line by line. Not to reach the end, but to remember how to begin. Outside, a group of school children walked by. Their laughter skipping down the sidewalk like marbles on tile. I didn't flinch. After a while, I closed the book and walked across the street to the small neighborhood market. I picked up fresh basil, 3 ripe tomatoes, and a wedge of cheese just beginning to soften at the edges. That night, I cooked not to fill an empty space, but to honor the part of me that still knew how. That evening, I tied my apron around my waist, the one with the fading sunflowers, edges slightly frayed from years of use. The kitchen was quiet. No music. No conversation. Just the rhythm of water running into the pot. The soft snap of basil leaves being torn. I didn't rush. There was no reason to. The onions sizzled. Garlic bloomed into the air. Tomatoes softened under the heat, releasing that gentle sweetness only time can draw out. I stirred without checking the clock. Seasoned with care, not precision. The scent filled the room. Not loud. Not demanding. Just real. I set one plate, one spoon, a folded napkin. No fanfare. No toast. Just me and a warm bowl of something I made because I wanted to, not because someone else asked. The first bite was simple. Lentils. Carrots. Rosemary from the windowsill. But the feeling, the way it bloomed in my chest, it was richer than any feast I'd made for company. That night, I opened the window, let the cool air in. Not because the room was hot, but because it felt like time to let the last of him drift out of the walls. One morning, I found myself walking toward the train station. Not with luggage. Not with expectation. Just because the air was crisp. Birdsong scattered gently through the trees. No rush. No appointment. Only the quiet shuffle of my shoes against the sidewalk. I turned the familiar corner. There it was, same faded roof. Same chipped paint near the benches. But it didn't feel the same. I didn't slow down. Didn't look for silver SUVs. Didn't search for any face I knew. I walked past the curb where I had once stood with my coat buttoned and hope too heavy in my hands. I walked past the ticket window where my name never appeared, past the bench that had once held my confusion. And I didn't stop. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to prove something, but because now I had nothing left to wait for, and everything left to walk toward. The next day, I sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad, a calculator, and a cup of tea gone cold. No one asked me to do it. There was no emergency, no deadline, only a quiet urge to know where I stood. I opened the drawer and pulled out old statements, receipts, bills from months ago. One by one, I began sorting, not with fear, but with calm. Each number wasn't just a balance. It was a reminder. I had paid for this roof. I had bought the groceries. I had handled repairs. Not perfectly, but consistently. These figures weren't proof for anyone else. They were proof for me that I had never truly lost control, only misplaced belief in who was holding it. By noon, I had drawn up a simple monthly plan, not to restrict, but to guide. At the bottom of the page, I scribbled 3 things: buy new dish towels, look into evening yoga, fresh flowers, once a week. It wasn't a budget. It was a life. That afternoon, I opened the contacts list on my phone. I scrolled slowly past names that hadn't called in years. Past numbers I no longer remembered the stories behind. Then I reached the emergency contacts section. Darren's name sat at the top. It always had. By default. By habit. By guilt. I stared at it. Not with bitterness. Not with anger. Just awareness. Then, with one breath in and one thumb press, I removed it. The phone asked, "Are you sure?" And for once, I didn't hesitate. I added a new name. Mine. Not as a contact, but as a note to myself. The first person you check in with should always be you. I set the phone down. Boiled water. Brewed a plain cup of tea. No sugar. No honey. Just the flavor, as it was a little bitter, but full and strangely comforting. I sat by the kitchen window. Pen in hand. Paper folded once. Then again, like it needed gentling. I wasn't writing to fix anything. Not to confront. Not to explain. Just to offer something that could wait. I began simply, Dear Emily. I'm not sure when you'll read this. Maybe not soon. Maybe not ever. And that's okay. I told her about the bookshop. About Ruthie's tea, bitter and steady. About a quiet night in a soft chair, and how it was the first place in a long time where my chest could rise and fall without needing permission. I didn't mention Darren. Not directly. This letter wasn't about blame. It was about remembering a different kind of warmth. I wrote about the soup I made with rosemary from the windowsill, and how the steam felt like forgiveness, even though no one had asked for it. I told her I missed her voice, that her high on the answering machine had echoed for days in my chest. And I ended with this: when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. No explanations required. Just tea. And time. I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope with no address on the front, then placed it in the back of the drawer where I keep things too important to throw away but not urgent enough to carry daily. Not everything has to be sent. Some truths are seeds. And seeds don't beg. They wait. That morning, I pulled out a sheet of paper. Not from obligation, just a pull inside me. Quiet and persistent. I sat by the kitchen window. Let the light stretch across the table. Then, with a slow breath, I began to write. Dear Emily, I don't know if this will ever reach you. Maybe it's not meant to. And that's okay. I told her about the bookshop, how the air smelled of old pages and something toasted. How Ruthie never asked me why I came in. Only offered me tea and stillness. I told her about the soup I made with rosemary. And how that small act, boiling, stirring, tasting, felt more healing than any apology I never received. I didn't write about Darren. Not the bank. Not the silence. Not the letter he forged. I wrote about a night when I slept without worry, wrapped in my own breath. You once said you missed my cookies. I added, I miss the afternoons we used to bake them together. It wasn't a letter to change her mind. It wasn't a case to defend myself. It was a soft thing. Something that could wait, or stay unread forever and still be true. I folded it gently, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it in the back of the drawer where I keep recipes. I might one day try again. Some truths aren't urgent. They just need somewhere quiet to live until someone's ready to hear them. At the bank, I stood quietly in front of the printer as it hummed to life. The clerk didn't say much, just asked me to confirm the spelling. I did, letter by letter. A few seconds later, a small rectangle slid out from the machine. It was new, clean, uncreased. A card, but not just any card. My name, only my name, printed in a way I hadn't seen it in years, without attachments, without footnotes, without someone else's claim beside it. I held it gently, ran my thumb across the embossed edge. The weight of it surprised me. Not heavy, just solid. Like something that belonged. This name had once been a wife's, a mother's, a beneficiary, a background figure. But today, it was mine. Clear. Singular. Sufficient. I tucked the card into my wallet, closed the zipper slowly, then walked outside. Didn't rush. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. I didn't tell anyone about the new card. Didn't need to. Some things aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to be felt. Like quiet. Like peace. I didn't win anything. Didn't defeat anyone. This wasn't a victory in the usual sense. But I reclaimed something that was mine before I ever learned how to doubt it. And that was enough. I don't need Darren to understand what he did. I don't even need Emily to choose sides. All I need is to keep choosing myself quietly, softly, deliberately, every day. If this story touched something quiet in you, something unspoken, something still healing, I hope you let it sit, let it stay. At Tenacity Tales, we don't ask for noise, only presence. If you feel like saying something, tell us where you're listening from, or leave a word, just one that feels like yours. And if you want to hear the next story when you're ready, you know where to find us. A quiet follow, a gentle subscribe, just so we don't lose each other in the noise.